Okay, welcome back to my channel, May Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we are filming part 2 of my revisiting all the 5 stars I've ever read series. I've really got to think of a better name for this. This is part 2 of what is going to be an either 5 or 6 part series where I'm going through all of the 5-star reads that I have logged on Goodreads and revisiting them and seeing if I still think that they belong in that 5-star category. In part 1, I explained more in depth how this idea came to be and some more specifics about the breakdown of these videos. So I will have part 1 linked down below, so please go check that out if you haven't seen it yet. I also talked about the first 30 books from my 175 book list in part 1. So today we're going to talk about the next set of 30. One of the things I found really interesting about part 1 of this is there were some books that I felt I wanted to take out of the 5-star club, but a couple books that I felt I wanted to raise up actually after reflecting on it for a little while. So this is a really interesting project and I'm excited to take you guys along with me. One quick disclaimer is I've started to film in this time gap that I have before I go pick up my daughter from nursery school, and I may not have time to finish. So if my outfit, makeup, background is different at some point during this video, there's your disclaimer. I may have to film this in 2 different sittings. But without further ado, let's get started. There was one book that I missed from part 1. I actually ended up talking about 29 books rather than 30 because I realized I skipped over one on the list, and that was The Lies of Locke Lamora. It's so nice to be able to hold up this beautiful edition of this book because I mean, I spent an inordinate amount of money to get this shipped to me in Japan. So if that's not a sign that this is still a 5-star book for me, I don't know what is. The inside is not different. It's the same story. And I also found that this particular kind of cover from Gollancz doesn't hold up well to reading because I have the smaller version of their special editions, and those are the ones I read from, and they did not hold up well. So this is just basically some eye candy for my shelf that I wanted to have for one of my favorite books of all time. Here's the spine. And here is the back with a quote that says, "The difference between honest and dishonest commerce is that when an honest man or woman of business ruins someone, they don't have the courtesy to cut their throat to finish the affair." And that really does sum up the vibe of Locke Lamora. Here are the end pages. They're the same in the front and the back. This is one of those books that I don't talk about enough on my channel anymore because I read it before I really started making videos in earnest. So I haven't had the chance to really talk about it as a recent read in the way that I have other favorites of mine, but this is an all-time favorite. I love every word on the page of this book. The wit, the humor, the snappiness, the quickness of it. It's unlike anything else I've ever read in the unique cross-section of all of the different vibes it has. The way that Scott Lynch handles the found family trope as well is one of the best I've ever seen. So if you haven't read this book, please do yourself a favor and pick it up. The very beginning of this book might be a little bit confusing if you're not used to being thrown into an adult fantasy world and you just kind of have to trust that Scott Lynch is taking you somewhere good. But I am here to say, please do trust the process because he is taking you somewhere fantastic. Next on the list is the House at Pooh Corner. This is the second book in the original Pooh quartet. It has a lot of the stories that are actually in the Disney cartoon. So this second installment was just as cute as the first one, and it actually felt a little more familiar to me because I grew up on that movie. It has the same wit and whimsy as the first set of Pooh stories, and I will be keeping it on this 5-star list. Now, next on the list was the full Lord of the Rings trilogy. I don't know why I marked this as a full trilogy rather than doing individual books. Of course, I gave it 5 stars, but I haven't read like what's the word I'm looking for, with all the books together in one. Oh my god, I can't think of what it's called. Not a compendium. A bind-up. There we go. I haven't read or don't own a bind-up of all 3 in one, so I don't know why I marked this. Maybe I liked this cover better and I didn't know how to use Goodreads yet, so I accidentally marked it as a second book. But I'm going to be removing that from this list because there's no reason to have double star ratings for the series. Next, I have Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. This is one of those side companion books that came out after the Harry Potter series was complete and they wanted to release all of the kind of supplementary materials. I said that weird. You get what I'm saying. While this isn't objectively a 5-star, I fully recognize that. I remember the joy of reading this because I was sad that the world was over. And this version of the book that I have has little notes in the margins that are supposed to be from the previous owners of the book and the current owner. So from different Hogwarts students. And it felt very immersive to me. And I remember reading this over and over again to kind of revisit that feeling of the wizarding world without having to read the full series again. So this one, for nostalgia's sake and the feeling of immersion it gave back to me when I was missing that world, it's gonna stay at a 5 stars. I have another double one here. One is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and then I also have Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I don't know why I have a separate review for each one and why I've marked each one. So what I'll probably do is take one of the reviews and copy and paste it to join one of the other reviews and then delete the second listing because there's no reason for me to have a double listing again. So I'll have to take care of that. Then I also have Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets for the same reason that I explained in the first part of this series. All of the Harry Potter books are just going to remain 5 stars for me because of the joy and the nostalgia associated with them. My dad read them to me before I could read for myself, and that started a tradition of him and I always getting the book right as it released, you know, being in line for those midnight releases at the bookstores and reading it for the first time together. Even when, you know, I was definitely old enough to be reading them on my own, we always read them for the first time together. And that memory will never be tainted. So it's going to be 5 stars for me for all of those books. Next, I have The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This one, I've written in the review that it's a 4.5 or a 5 star, and I remember waffling between those two, but I think I'm going to solidly put it at a 5 star just because of the way this is stuck in my brain. I can't really explain to you why it's a 5 star, but it is because it will not leave me alone. I still really resonate with this review. It says, the only thing I know for sure is this book deals heavily with themes of loss and grief, and it's left me feeling as empty as our main character afterwards, and I think that's the point. So this book is very contemplative. It's not plot heavy. If you were to ask me what really happens, not much, which isn't strange for Japanese fiction. And the more Japanese literature and fiction that I read, the less that feels strange to me. So if you're an extremely plot-based reader, this might not be for you, but it's very contemplative and it deals with the concept, as I said in my review, of loss, of grief, of memory, and what are the consequences of losing or holding on to those things. It's not a happy book, but it's not necessarily overtly sad either. I would call it melancholy, contemplative and melancholy. It's not a book that I would universally recommend to all readers, but for me personally, and the way it just kind of has stuck around with me ever since I've read it, it's gotta stay at the 5 star mark. This might be the last one I have time for before I have to go pick up my daughter, but this is going to be the Stormlight Archive. So I'm just going to name all 4 main books together. So we have The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, Oathbringer, and Rhythm of War. So these are heavy, so I'm just going to talk about one at a time. The Way of Kings was the first book that I read in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. I picked it up on a whim from the library in Japan, near where I live, not knowing what I was getting into at all, and it swept me away ever since. The rest is history. So the Stormlight Archive was my entry point into the Cosmere, and it still remains my favorite work in the Cosmere. We get introduced to all the intricate details, the magic system, and we spend a lot of time in environments in order to get to know them. And that kind of downtime is something that I enjoy thoroughly. I mentioned in my first part of this series that I love me a tavern scene, a market scene. Like, I will spend all day with the characters in those kinds of environments. So this book just, it has all of that for me. I do have favorites within the Stormlight Archive, so technically they're like different degrees of 5 stars, but they are all 5 stars for me because every time I jump back into this world, it's like a warm blanket in the sense that I can lose myself in it and don't have to come up for air if I don't want to. If I have to rank them, my favorite is definitely Words of Radiance. Something about this book brings all of the plot points from the first book together so beautifully. Talk about found family, Bridge 4. There are so many aspects of this book that are the perfect blending of what Sanderson is good at, but we're not far enough along in the series where the tropes become repetitive or you can kind of predict what might be coming when it comes to character arcs. I think Sanderson's plot points are very unique and interesting, so I am always surprised by the Sanderlanches at the end, but by the time that Rhythm of War came around, there were some character arcs that I was able to predict and kind of see what was coming. But this book, we hadn't gotten there yet. So everything is beautifully realized. It's just a perfect combination, like I said, of everything good about this series. There is a disgusting amount of tabs in here because I've read this twice now. I add tabs every time I read it. I'm going to be reading it for a 3rd time in preparation for the 5th Stormlight Archive book, so there'll be even more tabs possibly if there's even room for that. But this is probably my favorite work out of the entire Cosmere. This one right here. Next would have to be Oathbringer because I find Dalinar's deep dive into his history fascinating, and I love the arc of his character. There were some points in this story where it felt a bit slower for me, where it didn't feel in the first 2 books, so that's kind of the point that would make it a lesser of a 5 stars than the other 2. But keep in mind, these are all 5 stars, right? So these demerits that I'm mentioning are within being one of the best books I've read, right? So this is where we start to get some of those very overt Cosmere crossovers, and that is something that I just adore. I know people are kind of split on that. Some people like the more overt crossovers and some are not a big fan. I love it. So Oathbringer would be number 3. And Rhythm of War would be number 4 in the ranking so far. A lot of that has to do with the repetitive character arc aspect that I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to say names because I don't like giving away who's alive and not later in series. If you haven't read the Stormlight Archive, I don't want to give anything like that away, but there's a particular character, and I think if you've read this, you know who I'm talking about, whose arc became very repetitive for me here, and it didn't have that inspirational kind of swept me along with the excitement feeling that it did earlier in the series. But the Cosmere connections and crossovers we're getting, it's a thing of beauty. So this also has, and so does Oathbringer, I should have showed, but has a disgusting amount of tabs in it. And almost all of these, not all, that's dramatic, but a really good portion of these are excitement at connections and world building coming together. So I cannot wait to reread this. I've only read it once, so there's a lot of details I think that have left my brain at this point. So I definitely need to reread this before Stormlight Archive 5, When in Truth comes out in December. That's why I wanted to do the Stormlight Archive in one set, even though they weren't listed together on my Goodreads list, because I think it's easier to just kind of compare them with each other at the same time. So yeah, they're all 5 stars, but that would be my ranking within the 5-star range. All right, I gotta go pick my daughter up, so we'll see if I look different when I come back. All right, everyone, it is several days later. I haven't had the chance to sit down and film the second part of this video until today, but here we are. So let's continue. I believe I finished last time with the Stormlight Archive, and I just kind of did all of those books together. So let's go to the next one on the list. And that would be Monster. I'm holding volume 2 right now. Volume 1 is in the States. I have yet to continue the series past volume 1 this second time around, because I actually read this series for the first time when I was way too young to really appreciate it. I think I was in middle school maybe when I first read this, and I was like, I mean, the pictures aren't very pretty, and I just wasn't very interested in it. Then I picked it back up this year? I think it was this year. Wow. Yeah, pretty sure it was this year. Picked it up this year in English at first, and I could not put it down. I binge read the entire first volume. So now I have volumes 2, I think I have 2, 3, and 5 right now. These are the Japanese editions, and I'm picking them up little by little at used bookstores when I can, these particular versions of them. So I'm having a lot of fun with that kind of collector's aspect, finding them piecemeal whenever I can. And I do plan to continue the series. I remember almost nothing from it from when I read it when I was younger, but this time around, I mean, this is definitely worth 5 stars. Like I said, I could not put down the first volume once I picked it up. I read it all in one day. And if someone tried to talk to me, I was like, no, I'm in this world right now. So I haven't continued it because there was a gap between when I finished the first volume and when I started collecting these when I returned back from the States. So I haven't gotten back into it, but best believe I will be continuing, and I have predictions for this to be a full 5-star series. Next on my Goodreads is Ready Player One. Now this is one that could be suspect because I don't remember too much about it. In my review here, I say this book made me so happy I was literally laughing out loud during multiple scenes. Before this book, I was in a bit of a reading slump, and I've been jerked right out of it. So clearly based on this review, Ready Player One was what I needed at the time, and it scratched the right itch. But I really nowadays don't remember much. I think this would have to be one of those books that I reread to see if it deserves to remain here. I'll put it in the maybe pile for now, and I'll revisit it later. Okay, now we have a doozy of an opinion. One that I have talked about on my channel often, but if you haven't been around, maybe you haven't heard me say it before, but I say it with my chest, all right? And that is Mistborn Era 2 is better than Mistborn Era 1. I'm not sorry. Okay, genuinely how I feel. And in my review, in all caps, I have, I loved this book. Unpopular opinion here, I'm liking this better than Mistborn First Era so far. So I think what I wrote in this review is pretty much the same thing that I would say out loud, or I have said multiple times, which is I understand why people don't like these as much, especially if Mistborn Era 1 really worked for them. The vibe is completely different. The characters don't have the same dynamics between them, and just the overall feeling is extremely different here. So if you were coming off of Era 1 having loved it, and then you get this, I can imagine why this wouldn't be your favorite. Also, there's humor is a big part of this between Wax and Wayne. And I know a lot of people don't like Wayne and his sense of humor, but for me, it hits. And as that's such a key part of this book, that really adds to my enjoyment. I also think Sanderson really improved in the way that he writes female characters throughout the course of this series. This first book in particular is not the best, but I do feel like he developed throughout Era 2 so well that this book kind of takes on that aspect as well in my memory as the starting point for that. This is the weakest out of Era 2. I also firmly believe that, but I enjoyed it so much when I read it for the first time that it still sits at a 5-star. Next, we have Song of Achilles. This book is much beloved, so it's not really surprising that it's also 5 stars for me. I don't have anything against Greek retellings, I just don't tend to read them as much, so I don't really have a bunch of other books in this particular genre to compare it with, but this book made me ugly cry, so that's a rare thing. I think it earned its 5-star rating completely. Also, Miller's writing is gorgeous, and that continues into Circe as well, which I believe was 5 stars, was it? Well, I guess we'll find out here. But yeah, the writing also was just delectable. So yes, this is staying at 5 stars. Okay, these next two, it seems ridiculous that these are on here, and it kind of is, but we have 2 books here, Daruma-san ga and Daruma-san to. These are 2 books in a 3-book set of children's books. How many times did I just say books there? And these particularly teach how to use particles. So there is ga and to and another one that's no. I find Daruma-san no to be a little bit less engrossing and adorable, so that's why it's not quite 5 stars. But I actually got these from my mother-in-law before I had a kid because I love them so much. She got them for me for Christmas. I have since then given these to my daughter, so they're a bit more beat up now than they were when I, had them in their pristine little box, but they're being loved and used now, and that's the most important. But what I love about them is the adorable illustrations inside. So you start with a little Daruma, and there's a game called Daruma-sanga, and that's what this is kind of playing with. So Daruma-sanga, and then some action, some onomatopoeia will follow after. So in this first one, it's dote, which is to fall over. And something about, I don't know, the nuance of this image is so adorable to me. I can't help but smile every time I look at it. So Daruma-san-ga teaches the particle and onomatopoeia sounds. And then the second one is Daruma-san to. And to represents a relationship between two things. So here we have Ichigo-san to, which is strawberry, and then peko, which means to bow, and it shows this action. This is also an onomatopoeia, but it's not only those in this book. So these books are supposed to teach young kids the fundamentals of some aspects of Japanese language, but they're just so adorably put together that these are staying at 5 stars. Like, sorry, not sorry. I know it's odd that they're here, but like, they're staying. The next one on this list is a throwback, and that is wild. I read this ages ago, but I still remember it. I devoured this book. As someone who loves hiking and firmly believe in the restorative properties of nature, this book just hit so many points for me. We follow our main character, Cheryl, I believe. Yes, good thing the name was on the back there. And I say main character. This is a true telling of this woman's experience. And she went on the Appalachian Trail, I believe. Hold on. No, it was the Pacific Crest Trail. And her life, basically, as she knows it, comes to an end. Her mother passes away, her marriage falls apart, her relationship with her children is very difficult. So she goes on a solo hiking trip along the Pacific Crest Trail. And I still remember so many vivid details from this book and her experience of finding herself and what she really cares about in life through this. Honestly, I would love to reread this at some point. It's such an enjoyable floppy paperback. I mean, the pages are yellowed, like I've had this for a really long time, but I love it enough that I actually brought it to Japan with me. And I haven't read it since I brought it here, so I guess that was a waste of suitcase space. But I loved it enough that I wanted to have it near enough to be able to pick up. So yeah, I still adore this book, and this is definitely 5 stars. Then we have A Natural History of Dragons, the first book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. This is one of the few, spoiler alert, all 5-star series for me. It's rare for that to happen. This is one of them. When I read these books, my little anthropological heart is so happy. You can tell that Brennan, who we've had on page 2ing, by the way, so I do know this for a fact, you can tell that Brennan truly loves and cares about, has a passion for world building and anthropology. It's just, it's a beautiful thing to behold if your brain works that way. So not only is the world building so intricately created in that way, it also has the Regency era vibe. So if you like the feeling of Jane Austen, but you want it to be centered around a world in which dragons exist, this series right here. But I don't want you to go into this thinking that it's the typical fantasy dragons that we usually get. These dragons are actual creatures that live in this world and are part of the ecosystem. So they're not these mythical telepathic beings, that people ride. And we follow Lady Trent, who's a trailblazer in the natural sciences. In her intellect, in that she's interested in studying dragons, and 2, that she's a woman in a field that women typically don't enter. So it also has a little bit of that historical aspect to it too. It's so beautifully realized. And this is also in epistolary format, so it's her reflecting back on her life as an older woman. And sometimes the just little quips, the comments she has are so snarky and delightful. It's just, it's so good. And the audiobooks are incredible. If you haven't read this series, please do yourself a favor and pick it up if it sounds like something that would be up your alley, because it's so beautifully realized. I'll also have that page touring with Marie Brennan linked down below. Next is Sapiens. This is the graphic novel version of it, but I do have the normal physical book in the States, but I loved it so much that my parents actually got me the graphic edition. I think the second and third one are now out as well, so I would love to get those because I really enjoyed revisiting the main topics and themes in Sapiens via this format. Again, beautifully floppy, but it's really easily digestible in this format, and I would love to, like I said, continue on revisiting in this way. But this is definitely 5 stars. Again, the anthropological part of me is so interested in this. Also, the linguistic nerd in me also loves this. This first volume is The Birth of Humankind and goes into all of the different theories that converged together to get humans into this unique place that we're in history. How did we create society? What are the myths and the stories we tell ourselves to make society work? What got that started? I remember very specifically when I was reading this book that Hayato and I would have so many really interesting discussions, like after work or in the car, because one of the things that he studied in university was biology. So he loves evolutionary theories, things like that. And we would just sit and talk for hours about subjects that were brought up by this book. So I have so many good memories connected to it and I adore it. This next one on here is a throwback for me. It says I read it in 2016 and I don't have a review for it, so I assume this is before I was like really using Goodreads, but that is Lady Midnight from the Dark Artifices. Look, listen, I really enjoyed the drama of Cassandra Clare at one point, and I may still enjoy it again. But I think I read the original, 6 books, the original series, and then I read that second trilogy, the Clockwork Prince, Princess trilogy, and I did enjoy that as well. I mean, the drama, come on, it's a CW show, right? So if you're in the right mood for it, it's just a blast. It's a lot of fun. And so I continued with Lady Midnight, and I remember being surprised by how much I liked this book, because for me, Cassandra Clare sits between a 2-star for the bad installments in the series to a 4. But this one, something about the drama between the 2 main characters here, I don't exactly remember what the tropes were or what the main point was that made me feel this way, but it was 5 stars, obviously, because I'm talking about it in this video. But I still remember the feeling of, oh my god, this is 5 stars. I'm enjoying myself so much. I am so invested in this. And then I do think that I read the second one, Lord of Shadows, or started to. I think I started to, and then I didn't finish it. So I haven't read the entire Dark Artifices. I think it's a trilogy. But you know, considering how much I enjoyed the experience of Lady Midnight, I might be interested in rereading that first book and then reading it when I'm in the mood for something messy, you know, CW vibes. Yeah, I don't know. I could see myself revisiting this, but I'm going to keep it at 5 stars because clearly I have really good memories of it and I enjoyed it immensely. Next, we have a man called Uwe. I always say it wrong, no matter how many times I try, so apologies for that. But this book had me ugly crying on my bicycle. I remember so vividly. I was listening to the audiobook and I was on my way home from work, and there was this river that I often, you know, went past and kind of went beside for a while. And I ugly cried the entire length of that river. And the people that I passed, they're probably like, what? Because I was going pretty fast on my bike because I wanted to get home so I could cry in peace. But I was like zooming past these people. They're probably like, was that the sound of someone crying? What was that? So this book had me ugly crying. It gave me so much hope for the future. It's so beautifully written. Bachman is one of those authors that every book that I've read by him has made me cry, like ugly cry. And I mentioned earlier that that's typically a rare thing for me. You'll hear me talk about it more often in these videos because these are the 5 stars. Therefore, they're books that have done that to me. But it is a rare occurrence to make me ugly cry. And this is one of the books that did that to me in one of the most memorable fashions. Next, we have Shadows of Self, which is the second book in Era 2. Words, I can count, okay, numbers, we're getting there. The second book in Era 2. So this one improved on what was begun in Alloy of Law. Like I said, the first book is definitely the weakest, but the second and the third one, and then the fourth one, get stronger as we go forward. So I don't want to give anything away talking about series here, but just know that this is 5 stars, because if the first book was, and it was the weakest, it stands to reason that this one also would be. Ooh, this next one, I have such good memories of this, and that is The Kiss of Deception, The Remnant Chronicles. This series, I, again, have such vivid memories of this. I had had a little bit too much the night before, and the next day was a bit of a struggle fest. So while myself and a friend and Hayato were all recovering in our apartment, that was back in 2020, yeah, I picked this up on a whim because I had it on my Kindle, and I devoured it. I devoured the entire trilogy. I remember binge reading this entire series. It's one of the last series I remember really binge reading, just getting caught up in it from page 1 and not being able to leave the world to visit anything else until I was done. This is one of those YA series that I think holds up beautifully today. Of course, the first book is much more tropey. It's got like that love triangle aspect to it. It's a little messy. One of my favorite critiques that I've ever heard of this series came from a friend of mine, and they said, I couldn't stomach her playing farm boy and frolicking in the, in like, you know, the fields anymore with those 2 boys. And like, I get it. This first book is much more tropey. But what I think makes this series stand out is what Pearson does with those theories as it goes forward, with those tropes, with those ideas. A lot of them are twisted on their head, they're used in different ways, and I think the maturity really shows in the second and the third book. But the first book is more messy and fun, CW vibes, if you will. But what I really liked about the love triangle here also is one of the boys in the love triangle is out to kill her, and is an assassin, and the other's a prince, and you're not told who is who, so it's a mystery until the end. And that was a lot of fun and a good twist on that. So I stand by this, okay? This is 5 stars. Again, a little bit of a spoiler for 2 other books that will be coming up later in this series, but yes, it's a 5-star series for me. Then we have I Am Malala. This one I read ages ago. It's marked as 2018 on here, but that must have just been like when I added it, because there's no way I read this that late in life. I feel like this was almost a high school time read. And it touched me, you know, very deeply when I read it. I mean, Malala is just an incredible human. How can you not be touched by what she's gone through and the values that she holds, and the emphasis that she puts on education and how that can change someone's life? I agree with that wholeheartedly. So I don't remember many details from this book, but I don't see why I would knock it down from 5 stars, because Malala has an incredible story, and this is that story. So yeah, this can stay for sure. Then we have The Tropic of Serpents, which is the second book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent. 5 stars. I don't feel like I need to say too much about it, except that in each installment we go into a different setting as Lady Trent travels. During her career, we go to a bunch of different settings, different countries. And this book is where the political aspects that come to fruition later in the series really start to ramp up, and you see the tension between some of the different countries and places that she travels to. Also, having a new setting is a really good opportunity for Brennan to show her world-building chops, and she does. Okay, then we've got Miss Sarah J. Maas. The only book of hers that I've read that was 5 stars is A Court of Mist and Fury. Listen, it's good, okay? The first book, A Court of Thorns and Roses, was like a 2.5 or 3 star for me, but the second book, look, she was in her bag, okay? She knew what she was doing, and it was such an enjoyable read for me. And I still remember, everyone knows the particular scene that you remember when everything comes to fruition, kind of literally. The build-up is so good. The tension, delectable. So yeah, she knew what she was doing in this book. So Court of Mist and Fury, it's staying here. And then we have the third book in the second era of Mistborn, Bands of Mourning. Again, I feel the quality steadily increased. This is no exception. 5 stars. Okay, these next two, I could write a whole dissertation on how good these are, but that is The Grace of Kings and The Wall of Storms by Ken Liu. Not a surprise to anyone who's been around here, I am a Ken Liu stan account. I love everything the man touches. So these are the first 2 books in the quartet that is the Dandelion Dynasty. I won't go into too much about it because then this video will be way too long. But essentially this is Liu's pontification on modernity and what it might look like if it began in a non-Western culture, and that culture went through the kind of big structural changes that we associate with modernity in the West. So very, very interesting themes that began this, but the world building, the character work, every part of this book is so beautifully realized. I mean, these are huge. They're chonkers, okay? Ken Liu either writes really long things or really short things. He does nothing in between. And these are very much on the long side. But it is so incredibly worth your time. Talk about my anthropological and linguistic heart. Just finding joy, because you can tell that Liu lived in this world when he was writing these books. It's so beautifully put on page. And then on top of all of that, we've got meddling gods, really detailed, intricate character work that I will admit doesn't really hit on that super intricate level until The Wall of Storms. The first book is more of a macro level. And the first book is establishing the history and the kind of myths that the other characters and the societies use going forward in books 2, 3, and 4. So the first book does have a bit of a more epic, larger scale feel than the later books do, but it serves its purpose so well in the series, and it's enjoyable in its own right. So here I go, I'm talking too long. Ken Liu is another person that we have had on page 2ing. I have been blessed to talk to the man probably 2 or 3 times at this point, so I will have those linked down below. He's so incredibly intelligent. Could listen to him talk all day. So yeah, I'm gonna stop myself there, but these 2, yeah, 5 stars, absolutely, no question. Oh, the Veiled Throne was also on here. So that's the 3rd book in the Dandelion Dynasty, and you can also assume that the 4th book, when it comes up, will also be 5 stars. It's another 5-star series. It's gonna sound like I do that a lot because I'm talking about the 5 stars, but 5-star series are rare. There's only a few of them out there. Then we have The Heart of Betrayal, the 2nd book in the Remnant Chronicles, so I already talked about that. The Voyage of the Basilisk, the 3rd book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series, again, already talked about that. This one, though, has Lady Trent on a ship, and I am such a sucker for ships in fantasy settings. I was living my best life when I was reading this book. And I just realized that I think I went 2 books over what's supposed to be in this video. So you got 2 bonus books there. And so I'm gonna cut myself off here and move the rest to part 3. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books that I've mentioned here. Maybe you did and they weren't 5 stars for you. I would love to hear why not. Don't worry, I've got a thick skin at this point. So even if I love my babies, I can be more objective and see why others maybe hate them. You know, we'll see. So let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you gave these 5 stars and you love them as much as I do, let's gush together. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'd love to have you as part of this community, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Johnny!